Imagine a music business in which the artist is fake, the songs are fake, the listeners are fake, but the money is completely real. That sounds like a thought experiment. It already happened. In March 2026, a North Carolina man named Michael Smith pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. According to the United States Justice Department, Smith created hundreds of thousands of AI-generated songs, operated bot accounts that streamed those songs billions of times, and fraudulently collected more than $8 million in royalties. He spread the streams across thousands of tracks, specifically to make the activity harder for streaming platforms to detect. Think about what that means. The traditional music business required somebody to make the music, somebody to record it, somebody to distribute it, and somebody to listen to it. Smith discovered that in the age of generative AI, you can automate both ends of the transaction. Artificial supply, artificial demand, real money in the middle. And that might be the clearest preview we have of the problem the music industry is now confronting. Because the most important story about AI music is not that computers can make songs. It is that we may be entering the first cultural market where the supply of new content is effectively unlimited, and streaming was never designed for that. In June 2026, something extraordinary happened on Deezer. Fully AI-generated music exceeded 50% of the platform's new daily deliveries at peak. Deezer says it is now receiving roughly 90,000 fully AI-generated tracks every day. That is more than one new AI track every second, around the clock. If that rate was sustained for a year, it would amount to nearly 33 million tracks. Now, there is an important qualification here. This does not mean half of all music being released everywhere on Earth is AI-generated. This is Deezer's own intake, measured using Deezer's detection technology. But the trend inside that dataset is remarkable. At the beginning of 2025, Deezer estimated that roughly 10% of the music being delivered to it was fully AI-generated. By April, it was 18%. By September, 28%. By January 2026, Deezer was receiving more than 60,000 AI tracks a day, representing roughly 39% of intake. In April, that rose to almost 75,000 tracks and 44%. Then, at peak in June, it crossed 50%. That is an astonishing expansion of supply. But here is the strange part. People are not listening to it. Despite accounting for more than half of new deliveries at peak, fully AI-generated tracks produce only around 1 to 3% of actual streams on Deezer. And Deezer says that, during 2025, as much as 85% of the streaming activity on fully AI-generated music was fraudulent. Across Deezer's entire catalog, by comparison, it classified about 8% of streams as fraudulent. So we have this bizarre new cultural economy where supply can explode without corresponding demand, and that tells us something crucial. AI has not solved the problem of making people care. It has solved the problem of making more stuff. Those are very different things. For most of recorded music history, creating a commercially usable recording was expensive. You needed musicians, instruments, time, a studio, recording engineers, mixing, mastering, artwork, manufacturing, or digital distribution, and usually some combination of skill, money, relationships, and persistence. Digital audio workstations reduced those costs. Home recording reduced them again. Digital distribution demolished another barrier. Streaming made the catalog shelf effectively limitless. Generative AI now attacks what remained, the cost of producing the recording itself. A user can give a system an idea and receive a complete song without assembling a band, learning an instrument, hiring a vocalist, or spending days arranging and recording. That does not make the true computational cost literally zero, and it certainly does not make every output good. But from the perspective of an individual trying to generate another plausible track, the marginal cost and time are collapsing. Investors clearly believe this matters. In June 2026, Suno announced that it had raised more than $400 million at a post-money valuation of $5.4 billion. The company describes its mission not merely as giving professional musicians new tools, but expanding music creation to millions of people who had never previously made music. And there is an optimistic interpretation of that. Maybe music creation becomes like photography after the smartphone. Billions of people gain a form of expression that once required specialized equipment and expertise. Songs become personalized gifts, jokes between friends, memories, fan creations, children's stories set to music, experimental sketches, soundtracks for tiny moments that would never have justified hiring a composer. Suno itself says people are already using the service for birthdays, graduations, inside jokes, and highly personal songs for family members. That part is genuinely exciting, but the economic problem begins when an infinite creation machine plugs into a financial system built for scarce human attention. Because humans did not suddenly receive more hours in the day, we can manufacture 1 billion additional songs. We cannot manufacture 1 billion additional hours of listening from each person. And that means the scarce resource in music is moving. It used to be disproportionately concentrated in production and distribution. Now it is becoming attention. To understand why infinite music creates such a strange economic problem, follow one song. Suppose you use an AI generator and produce a track. Getting that track onto a streaming service is not necessarily difficult. DistroKid, for example, explicitly permits music created with AI tools, provided that the uploader owns the necessary rights, does not impersonate somebody without permission, does not infringe other rights, and does not mass-generate music to game streaming systems. TuneCore has taken a more restrictive position. It says it supports AI-assisted human creation, but will not distribute works that are 100% AI-generated. Already, something interesting is happening. The old gatekeeper might have been an A&R executive deciding whether your band deserved a record deal. The new gatekeepers can be a distributor's spam policy, an AI detector, and a recommendation algorithm. Suppose the song gets through. On Spotify, there is not a universal fixed payment of some exact number of dollars for every stream. Spotify describes its system in terms of stream share. Rights holders receive a share of relevant royalty pools based broadly on their share of listening. If music associated with a rights holder represents roughly 1% of eligible streams in a particular pool, that rights holder receives roughly 1% of that pool, subject to the actual licensing and contractual structure. Spotify says it paid more than $11 billion to the music industry in 2025 and pays almost 70% of its music revenue back to music rights holders. This distinction matters. Streaming money is not an infinitely expanding pile of cash created every time somebody uploads another track. There is a finite amount of subscription and advertising revenue being allocated among competing rights holders, which means that in a stream share system, fraudulent consumption is not just somebody extracting money from a technology company. It can alter who receives a portion of the pool. That is why the Michael Smith case is so revealing. According to prosecutors, he was not merely generating music people happened to enjoy. He manufactured a giant catalog and then manufactured the listening activity necessary to monetize it. Generative AI makes that strategy dramatically easier because fraud has a supply problem too. Imagine trying to run billions of fake streams on one song. That looks suspicious. Spread them across 10 songs and it still looks suspicious. Spread them across hundreds of thousands of apparently distinct songs, each with different titles and audio, and suddenly you have a much more complicated detection problem. A guy can generate the camouflage. The Justice Department says Smith deliberately distributed his automated streams across thousands of songs to avoid anomalous activity that might alert platforms, and that he turned to AI specifically because his scheme required an enormous quantity of songs. This is the moment when AI music stops being merely a debate about whether a robot can write a decent chorus. The technology has changed the economics of spam. Email had this problem. Search engines had this problem. Social media has this problem. Whenever publishing becomes essentially free, somebody discovers that it can be profitable to generate far more material than any human would ever rationally create. Music is arriving at that stage. Spotify said in September 2025 that it had removed more than 75 million spammy tracks during the preceding 12 months. Its examples included mass uploads, duplicates, search engine optimization manipulation, and artificially short tracks. Spotify said generative AI had made it easier to create enormous quantities of such material and announced a spam filtering system designed to identify tracks and uploaders engaged in these tactics and prevent those tracks from being recommended. And long before AI music crossed 50% of Deezer's new deliveries, Spotify had already changed its royalty rules in a way that looks remarkably relevant to an age of infinite supply. A track now needs at least 1,000 streams during the previous 12 months to generate recording royalties on Spotify. Spotify says 99.5% of listening already goes to tracks above that threshold. But it says tens of millions of tracks below the threshold collectively represented the other roughly 0.5%, with an average theoretical recording royalty of only about 2 cents per track per month. Instead of distributing those tiny amounts across that enormous long tail, Spotify reallocates the money toward qualifying tracks. Whatever you think about that policy, notice the deeper economic logic. Streaming is beginning to impose scarcity on an abundance machine. Deezer does it differently. It says fully AI-generated tracks are removed from algorithmic recommendations and editorial playlists. Fraudulent streams are demonetized. As of July 2026, Deezer also said it would remove AI tracks associated with fraud and AI tracks that had gone at least 6 months without being streamed. Spotify says it will suppress spam from recommendations. DistroKid says no mass-generated spam. TuneCore draws a line at completely AI-generated releases. These are all different policies, and they should not be treated as equivalent, but they point toward the same structural problem. When the cost of supplying content approaches zero, a platform eventually has to invent a new cost, a minimum listening threshold, a reputation requirement, a fraud screen, a distributor policy, a recommendation penalty, an identity check, a licensing requirement. Something has to become scarce again, because a marketplace cannot meaningfully allocate finite attention and finite money among an infinite number of indistinguishable claims on both. And this changes what distribution means. For decades, musicians celebrated the democratization of distribution. You no longer needed a record label to manufacture CDs and convince physical stores to give you shelf space. But a world in which everyone can get onto the shelf produces a new problem. The shelf is no longer valuable. Being seen on the shelf is. This may be the most important shift in the whole story. When music becomes infinite, recommendation becomes more powerful than distribution. Spotify already has more than 100 million tracks available. Its recommendation systems shape the homepage, personalized playlists, search and discovery. Discover Weekly alone had generated more than 100 billion track streams by its 10th anniversary in 2025, and Spotify said the playlist was creating more than 56 million new artist discoveries each week. In 2026, Spotify's own researchers described a personally curated view of the service as a key part of the experience, while the company continued building systems that let users steer recommendations through natural language prompts, listening history, and explicit taste controls. So picture 2 songs. One was written by a musician over 6 months, recorded after dozens of failed versions, mixed carefully, and released after years spent building an audience. The other was the 7,000th track created that afternoon by an automated generation pipeline. From the perspective of digital storage, they are both just audio files. From the perspective of a recommendation system trying to allocate a listener's next 3 minutes, they are competing for the same scarce slot. That slot may now be more economically valuable than the ability to create the song. Deezer's numbers almost accidentally demonstrate this. More than half of its new deliveries at peak can be fully AI generated, while only 1 to 3% of listening goes to that material. Deezer explicitly attributes part of the low consumption to its decision to exclude detected fully AI-generated songs from algorithmic and editorial recommendation. In other words, infinite supply can exist underneath the interface without becoming infinite culture. Because culture still requires selection, something has to tell you which 3 minutes matter. This is why the future music industry's most important companies may not simply be those capable of generating the largest amount of audio. They may be the institutions capable of establishing trust. Who made this? Why should I care? Is this artist real? Is this voice authorized? Did somebody choose to make this, or was it automatically generated because sad acoustic breakup song happens to convert well in a certain playlist? Is this recommendation here because people genuinely like it, or because somebody manipulated the system? Those questions become more valuable as production becomes cheaper. And identifying AI music is already becoming its own technological industry. Deezer says its system looks for artifacts left in generated audio that are generally inaudible to people but detectable computationally. It reports 99.8% accuracy for its current system, with roughly 2 misses per 1,000 AI-generated tracks and fewer than 1 false positive per 10,000 authentic tracks under its stated evaluation. Those are Deezer's own performance figures, not a guarantee that every future AI model will be equally detectable. The underlying research is fascinating. Deezer researchers found that certain generative audio architectures leave subtle patterns in the frequency spectrum. Their paper traces some of these artifacts to deconvolution operations used by generative models. The resulting spectral peaks can function a little like forensic traces, patterns humans may not consciously hear, but software can measure. The researchers tested the approach on open-source models as well as outputs from commercial systems including Suno and Udio, reporting accuracy above 99% in several experimental scenarios. But this is going to be an arms race. A detector identifies a signature, a generator changes architecture, a detector adapts, a fraudster post-processes the output, the detector looks for something else. So detection alone is unlikely to solve the deeper problem, and perhaps it should not. Because AI music itself is rapidly becoming an inadequate category. A singer might write every note and lyric, then use an AI-assisted mastering tool. A producer could generate a drum pattern and replace half of it. A songwriter could use AI for a temporary vocal demo. A musician could license their own voice model. A fan might create an authorized remix. Another user might type one sentence and publish the untouched output. Calling all of those things simply AI music hides more than it reveals. Spotify has acknowledged exactly this problem. Its AI disclosure initiative uses music credit information intended to identify specific uses such as AI-generated vocals, lyrics, instrumentation, or production, instead of forcing everything into a crude yes or no label. Spotify said in April 2026 that it was already receiving tens of thousands of these AI-related credit disclosures per day. The important distinction may eventually be less about whether AI touched a song and more about provenance. Who exercised creative control, who owns the rights, whose identity is being represented, who consented, and who gets paid. That brings us to copyright. Because one of the strangest things about infinite music is that the generated song itself may become easier to create at exactly the moment the rights surrounding music become more valuable. There are really two different copyright questions in AI music, and they are constantly confused. The first is, can you own the song the AI produces? The second is, did the AI company have the right to use the music that helped build the model? Those questions can have completely different answers. On the first question, The United States Copyright Office has said that generative AI output can receive copyright protection only to the extent that sufficient expressive elements were determined by a human author. Human-authored material that remains perceptible or creative human selection, arrangement, and modification can qualify. Merely giving a system prompts, by itself, is not enough to make the machine-determined expressive elements copyrightable under the Office's interpretation of current United States law. Think about the economic irony. We may be able to produce songs in unimaginable quantities, while some of the most completely automated songs may also possess weaker copyright protection than traditionally authored recordings. The output becomes abundant, the proprietary value may migrate elsewhere, and that elsewhere increasingly appears to be the inputs, the licenses, the identities, and the relationships around the model. The lawsuits surrounding Suno illustrate the fight. On August 18, 2026, a federal judge in Massachusetts allowed major record companies to amend their lawsuit against Suno to add a claim under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The labels allege that Suno obtained copyrighted recordings from YouTube and used tools including YT-DL and YT-DLP to circumvent YouTube's rolling cipher when acquiring audio. The judge did not rule that Suno ultimately violated the law. He ruled that, at this stage, the allegations plausibly stated a claim and that the technical facts would require further development. Then on August 21st, a judge rejected Suno's attempt to dismiss copyright and DMCA claims brought in a proposed class action by country musician Anthony Justice and his recording company, although a Tennessee consumer protection claim was dismissed. Again, allowing claims to proceed is not a finding that Suno is ultimately liable. And on August 17th, Roundhill Music filed separate federal lawsuits against Suno and Anthropic. Roundhill alleges unauthorized use of works associated with at least 500 songs, including compositions from artists such as James Brown, The Kinks, and the Goo Goo Dolls. It told the court the litigation could eventually encompass 10,000 or more compositions and potentially seek damages approaching or exceeding $1 billion. Those are allegations and potential claims, not adjudicated damages. The legal theory around AI training is still being worked out case by case. The United States Copyright Office's 2025 report on generative AI training stressed that fair use depends on the particular works, sources, purposes, and market effects involved. But the office made an especially important observation. Commercial use of enormous quantities of copyrighted expressive works to generate competing expressive content, particularly when the material was obtained through illegal access, can fall outside established fair use boundaries. At the same time, the office recommended allowing voluntary AI licensing markets to continue developing, rather than immediately creating a new broad government licensing regime, and that licensing market is no longer theoretical, it is forming remarkably quickly. Warner Music Group, which had been litigating against Suno, reached an agreement with the company in November 2025 that settled their previous litigation and established a framework for licensed AI models. Warner said participating artists and songwriters would have control over whether their names, images, likenesses, voices, and compositions could be used in new AI-generated songs. The agreement also put restrictions around downloads and future models. Universal Music Group settled its litigation with Udio and agreed to work on a platform powered by new technology trained on authorized and licensed music, with licensing for both recordings and publishing. KLA separately reached AI licensing agreements with Universal, Sony, Warner, and their publishing companies for a system it says is trained entirely on licensed music. And just 10 days before this script's August 22nd, 2026 cutoff, BMG announced a strategic agreement with Suno covering BMG's recorded and publishing repertoires. BMG said participating artists and songwriters would be compensated and would choose whether to participate, while the deal would also settle prior use of BMG works. This is where the story gets much more interesting than labels versus AI. The labels are suing AI companies and licensing AI companies at the same time. That is not necessarily a contradiction. Their emerging position appears to be, AI generation is coming, but copyrighted repertoire, artist identities, and permission to use them should remain economically scarce. Generative technology destroys one form of scarcity and creates pressure to monetize another. The recording itself becomes cheap to manufacture, but permission to generate with a famous artist may be valuable. A trusted voice becomes licensable. A songwriting catalog becomes training infrastructure. A name and likeness become premium inputs. Provenance becomes a product feature. In May 2026, Spotify and Universal announced an agreement for an upcoming paid premium add-on that would let fans create authorized covers and remixes using participating artists' and songwriters' works, with creators sharing in the value generated by those experiences. Notice how different that business is from simply dumping 10 million additional anonymous songs into Spotify. It does not sell abundance by itself. It sells access to something scarce inside the abundance. Permission, recognition, an artist you already care about. This leads to the deeper answer to our original question. What is a song worth when making another song costs almost nothing? Probably less if the only thing being sold is the existence of an audio file. But music has never derived all of its value from the audio file. A Beatles recording is not valuable to people simply because it contains a particular sequence of frequencies. A fan does not buy a concert ticket because live sound is the most convenient way to consume an MP3. A teenager does not cover a bedroom wall in photographs of an artist because the artist has solved an optimization problem involving melody and chord progression. Music functions as identity, memory, status, community, biography, ritual, a relationship with a person, scene, or moment. And those things do not become infinite just because audio generation does. In fact, the AI companies and streaming platforms themselves are beginning to behave as though this is true. Spotify's head of music wrote in January 2026 that, as AI makes content more abundant, human connection becomes more valuable. Spotify said it wants to provide more artist context, stories, behind-the-scenes material, rehearsal footage, and live performance, because those elements can transform casual listening into a longer-term fan relationship. You should treat that partly as a company's description of its own strategy, but look at the incentives behind it. Spotify does not have a shortage of songs. No major streaming platform does. Its problem is helping listeners care about some tiny subset of them. And Suno, perhaps surprisingly, seems to have reached a related conclusion. As part of its Warner deal, Suno acquired Songkick, a concert discovery business, with the stated goal of connecting interactive music creation with live performance and deepening artist-fan relationships. Why would one of the world's most prominent infinite song machines buy a business devoted to humans physically showing up somewhere to see other humans perform? Because live performance contains several things generative abundance cannot effortlessly duplicate. There are only so many seats. There is only one Friday night. The artist can only physically occupy so many venues. The audience knows that other people are experiencing the same event. Scarcity is built into the medium. The same logic applies to identity. You can generate 10,000 voices. There is still only one artist with a particular history, reputation, public identity, and relationship with fans. And this suggests that music may split into two increasingly different economic categories. One category is music as functional audio. Give me 90 minutes of unobtrusive piano for reading. Give me dynamic ambient music that changes with my video game. Give me a custom lullaby containing my child's name. Give me instrumental music synchronized perfectly to a 37-second advertisement. Give me a soundtrack for this one particular workout, mood, joke, or private memory. For many of these use cases, Infinite generation is not a bug, it is the entire point. The listener may not care who the artist is, because the utility lies in the audio fitting the situation. That market is likely to become brutally commoditized. Why choose one generic meditation track from 20 million nearly interchangeable recordings if software can make the exact one you want in real time? But the second category is music as cultural attachment. Not, give me a song like this. Give me the new song by this person. Give me the album everyone in this community is discussing. Give me the artist whose career I have followed for 7 years. Give me the song associated with this breakup, this summer, this political moment, this group of friends, this concert I attended. In that market, abundance may actually increase the premium on authorship and context. Consider Deezer's listener experiment. In a 2025 Ipsos survey commissioned by Deezer, 9,000 adults across 8 countries were played 3 tracks, 2 fully AI-generated and 1 human-made, and asked to classify them. 97% of respondents failed to classify all 3 correctly. That figure is sometimes simplified into 97% of people cannot tell AI from human music, but the precise result is that 97% failed the 3-track test. More revealingly, 80% supported clear labeling of fully AI-generated music, and 73% of streaming users wanted to know when a streaming service was recommending it. That creates a paradox. The sound may become difficult to distinguish, yet information about how the sound was made may become more important. Why? Because once technical quality is abundant, provenance can become part of the product. You see versions of this in other markets. A factory can create an extremely accurate reproduction of a painting that does not make the original painting economically worthless. Synthetic gemstones can look spectacular. That does not eliminate consumer interest in provenance. A mass-produced chair can be functionally superior to a handmade one. The handmade object can still command a premium because people are buying a story about who made it and how. Music may be entering a similar era. Not because human-made music will automatically be better. That argument will become harder and harder to defend as AI improves. The stronger argument is that human origin can itself carry information and meaning. When somebody writes a breakup song after a breakup, the listener is not merely purchasing an optimized pattern of pitches communicating sadness. Part of the experience is the belief that another conscious person felt something, transformed it into a song, and offered it to strangers. That chain of intention is culturally valuable even when a machine can imitate the audible result. And in an environment saturated with synthetic media, credible human intention may become scarce. There is a tempting way to frame all of this. Humans against machines, real music against fake music, artists against AI. I don't think that framing survives contact with what is actually happening. Human musicians are already using AI tools. Spotify itself says AI involvement is a spectrum rather than a binary category. Distributors are building different policies around assisted versus fully generated work. Labels are settling lawsuits while simultaneously constructing licensed AI products. Suno is becoming more closely integrated with traditional rights holders, not less. Spotify and Universal are preparing licensed generative remix tools. The technology will probably enter normal music production in hundreds of boring ways that nobody bothers debating. An artist may generate 20 arrangement ideas, keep 2, play them manually, rewrite the melody, replace the vocal, record real drums, and use AI to clean background noise. At what percentage does that become an AI song? That may eventually sound as strange as asking what percentage of a modern recording is a computer song. The much bigger transformation is economic. For the first time, music is confronting the possibility that finished recordings themselves may cease to be scarce at any meaningful scale. When that happens, value does not disappear, it migrates. First, it migrates toward attention. A song that nobody discovers has essentially no market power, however beautifully it was produced. As supply expands, ranking, recommendation, curation, social sharing, and trusted taste become increasingly important. Spotify's own research has found that social music discovery is affected not merely by the song, but by the relationship between the sender and recipient. People were more likely to engage with a newly shared artist when the recommendation came through a stronger social connection and aligned with their taste. Second, value migrates toward identity. When 10,000 songs can sound convincingly good, who is this becomes more important than is this competently produced. That is why voice, likeness, reputation, and artist consent appear repeatedly in emerging AI licensing agreements. Warner's Sono deal explicitly gives participating artists and songwriters control over use of names, images, likenesses, voices, and compositions. Third, value migrates toward rights. If outputs become abundant, legally reliable training data and permission become differentiators. The emergence of licensed model agreements involving Warner, Universal, Sony, BMG, Suno, Udio, and Case-Lay suggest that copyrighted catalogs are being transformed from something AI companies might once have treated primarily as training material into something that can itself be licensed as infrastructure. Fourth, value migrates toward verification. Platforms need to know whether streams are real, whether artists are being impersonated, whether an uploader owns what they claim to own, and whether a catalog is a genuine creative project or an automated attempt to extract microscopic fractions from a royalty system at enormous scale. Spotify's spam policies and Deezer's detection and demonetization policies are early versions of that verification layer. And finally, value migrates toward experiences that remain stubbornly finite. Concerts, physical communities, direct artist-fan relationships, moments where provenance is obvious because the person is standing in front of you. This does not mean musicians are safe. An infinite supply shock can hurt people even if human artistry retains cultural value. Functional music work may become harder to sell. Some kinds of stock music, low-cost composition, anonymous production, and background audio could face intense substitution pressure. Recommendation systems can concentrate attention even more aggressively as catalogs expand. Fraud can divert resources if platforms fail to detect it, and musicians may find themselves competing not only with every song ever recorded, but with an endless stream of material produced specifically to satisfy whatever the algorithm currently rewards. But there is another side to this. If AI makes creation accessible to vastly more people, the number of people who think of themselves as music makers may expand dramatically. Some will become more interested in human musicians, not less. Some will use generative tools as instruments. Some will pay for authorized interactions with artists they love. Some will discover that generating a technically impressive song is easy and building a career anyone cares about is incredibly difficult. That last distinction may become the defining lesson of the AI era. Making music and becoming meaningful were never the same problem. For a brief period in technological history, they looked more closely connected because producing and distributing professional music was itself so difficult. AI breaks that connection. It may give nearly everybody the ability to generate the artifact. It does not give everybody a history. It does not give everybody taste. It does not give everybody judgment. It does not give everybody a community. It does not give everybody trust. And it certainly does not give everybody attention. So what is a song worth when creating one costs almost nothing? The answer is not nothing. A better answer is that the song, by itself, becomes less complete as a unit of economic value. The valuable package becomes the song plus the person, the story, the rights, the reputation, the recommendation, the community, the provenance, and the experience around it. The recording becomes abundant, meaning remains scarce. And perhaps the strangest evidence of this comes from Deezer itself. More than half of new deliveries at peak can be generated by machines, yet almost all listening still goes somewhere else. That gap between what can be produced and what anybody cares to hear is the entire future of the music business hiding in one statistic. We spent a century building technology that made music easier to record, then decades making it easier to distribute, then streaming made almost every song instantly accessible. Now generative AI is making the songs themselves abundant. At every stage, somebody assumed the previous scarce thing was where the value lived. And at every stage, the value moved. From the physical disc to access, from access to discovery, from discovery to attention. And now, perhaps, from attention to something even harder to manufacture, a reason to care.